The moment you stop chasing, everything starts chasing you. There's a type of person you've probably met. They don't raise their voice. They don't argue. They don't post emotional rants at 2 a.m. They don't beg for anyone's attention. They simply disappear. And somehow, inexplicably, that disappearance is louder than anything they could have ever said. Think about the last time someone you cared about went quiet on you. Not angry quiet. Not passive-aggressive quiet. Just gone. No explanation. No drama. Just a calm, deliberate withdrawal. What happened inside you? Did your mind race? Did you replay every conversation, searching for what you did wrong? Did you suddenly find yourself needing their attention, even though an hour before, you barely thought about them? That feeling, that sudden, almost desperate pull, that is not love. That is not missing someone. That is the shock of losing control over something you didn't even realize you were controlling. Here's what nobody teaches you in school, in church, or at the dinner table. The most powerful position you can ever occupy is the one where people aren't sure if they still have you. Not because you're playing games, not because you're cruel, but because you finally stopped being predictable. Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in the history of psychology, said something that should be carved into every mirror in every bathroom in America. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. Read that again, because here's what it actually means in real life. The moment you go quiet, the moment you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop being the one who always shows up first, you become a mirror. And the people around you are suddenly forced to look at their own reflection. And most people, they hate what they ask, so they push. They poke. They send the passive-aggressive text. They suddenly need you. They bring up old memories. They tell mutual friends you've changed. And all of that, every single bit of it, is not about you. It's about them realizing they never actually knew you. They knew your reaction. They knew your availability. They knew the version of you that always picked up the phone, always responded within minutes, always showed up, even when showing up cost you everything. But they never knew you. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because if you're being honest with yourself right now, maybe you don't fully know you either. Maybe you've spent so long being available for everyone else that silence actually scares you too. Maybe the idea of withdrawing, of not responding, of just being still, feels almost impossible. Because who are you if you're not being needed? What is your value if you're not being useful? That question, right there, is the crack in the foundation. And we're going to go deep into it. Because once you understand why you can't stop reacting, why you keep saying yes when every cell in your body is screaming no, everything changes. The way people treat you changes. The energy in the room when you walk in changes. You change. But first, I need you to be honest with one thing. When was the last time you chose yourself first and didn't feel guilty about it? If you can't remember, then what comes next was written for you. The programming you never agreed to. You didn't learn to people please. You were trained to survive by doing it. Let me paint you a picture. It's a Tuesday evening. You're exhausted, the kind of tired that lives in your bones, not just your body. You just got home. You haven't eaten. Your phone has been buzzing all day with other people's problems, other people's needs, other people's emotional emergencies. And then one more message comes in. Someone needs you. Again. And before your brain even processes the words on the screen, your fingers are already typing back. Of course. I'm here. What do you need? You didn't think about it. You didn't choose it. It just happened. That automatic response. That is not kindness. That is conditioning. Here's something most self-help content won't tell you, because it's uncomfortable. The reason you can't stop reacting, can't stop over-explaining, can't stop being available for people who drain you dry. It didn't start with them. It started with you at 7 years old, or 9, or 12, the exact age when you first learned that your emotional availability was the price of being loved. Maybe it looked like this. You came home excited about something, a drawing, a grade, a new friend, and the adult in the room was distracted, stressed, unavailable. And without anyone saying a single word, you learned. My needs take up too much space. Or maybe it looked different. Maybe the only time the house felt safe was when you were the one keeping the peace. When you smiled instead of cried. When you said, I'm fine, instead of, I'm falling apart. When you became the emotional thermostat for an entire household, reading the room, adjusting yourself, making sure nobody's temperature got too high. You weren't a child. You were a caretaker in a child's body, and you were rewarded for it. Good grades. Compliments. You're so mature for your age. And that reward system never turned off. Carl Jung had a name for what you built back then. He called it the persona, the mask we construct to be accepted by the world around us. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The persona isn't fake. It's functional. It kept you safe. It kept the peace. It got you through childhood in one piece. The problem is, you're not a child anymore. But you're still wearing the same mask. And now that mask has a job title. The one who always shows up. The reliable friend. The understanding partner. The employee who never says no. The family member who holds everything together while quietly falling apart inside. Sound familiar? Here's where it gets even more specific. And I want you to sit with this one. Have you ever noticed that the moment you don't respond immediately, something almost like panic sets in? Not because you don't want to respond, but because somewhere deep in your nervous system, a very old alarm goes off. If I don't respond, they'll leave. If I don't show up, they won't love me anymore. If I say no, I become the bad guy. That alarm? That is not your intuition talking. That is a wound talking. A wound from the first time being yourself cost you something. Approval, connection, safety. And you've been paying that debt ever since. To people who never even sent you the original bill. I worked with someone once. Let's call her Maya. Brilliant woman. Successful career. Everyone in her life came to her with their problems, their crises, their 3 a.m. breakdowns. But Maya hadn't slept a full night in years. Not because of insomnia. Because her phone was always on. Always within reach. Always waiting to be needed. One day she said something that stopped me cold. I don't even know what I like anymore. I only know what everyone else needs. That's not selflessness. That's disappearance. Maya had become so available to the world that she had become completely invisible to herself. And this right here, is what Jung meant when he warned about losing yourself inside the persona. When the mask becomes the face. When your role becomes your identity. When you no longer remember what you actually want. Because wanting things for yourself has always felt dangerous. So here's the question I want to leave you with before we go deeper. Think about the last time you said yes, when every part of you wanted to say no. What were you actually afraid would happen if you said no? Not what you told yourself. Not the polite excuse. The real fear. The one underneath. Because that fear, that specific, quiet, deeply personal fear, is the exact place where your energy is leaking out. Every single day. And until you name it, you cannot reclaim it. In part 3, we're going to talk about something darker. Because now that you understand why you react, we need to talk about the people in your life who know you react this way and have been using it quietly, skillfully, sometimes without even realizing it themselves. The mechanics of invisible manipulation and how your unavailability completely dismantles it. That's next. In part 4, we go somewhere most people are afraid to go. Because now that you can see the manipulation, now that you understand the mechanism, we need to talk about the weapon that dismantles all of it. Completely. Permanently. Not confrontation. Not arguments. Not long explanatory texts at midnight. Silence. But not the silence you've been taught to fear. A different kind entirely. The kind that doesn't just protect you. It transforms you. The weapon they never see coming. The most powerful statement you can make is the one you never say. Picture this. 2 people are arguing. One is loud, emotional, laying out every point, every grievance, every piece of evidence like a lawyer in front of a jury. The other one is completely still. No raised voice. No defensive explanation. No counterattack. Just silence. Now tell me, who has the power in that room? Not the one talking. never the one talking. We have been taught our entire lives that silence is weakness, that if you don't defend yourself, you must be guilty, that if you don't explain yourself, people will assume the worst, that if you go quiet, you are losing. And so we talk. We over-explain. We send the paragraph-long text at midnight trying to make someone understand something they have already decided not to understand. We exhaust ourselves trying to win arguments that were never about being right in the first place. They were about keeping you reactive, keeping you visible, keeping you controllable. And every word you spoke was fuel. Here's what nobody told you about silence. Real silence, conscious, deliberate, chosen silence, is not the absence of something. It is the presence of everything. It is presence without permission, power without performance, strength without a single word of proof. Jung saw silence not as emptiness, but as what he called the fertile ground, the place where the psyche stops performing for the outside world and finally starts listening to itself. And when you start listening to yourself, you stop being available to everyone else's noise. Let me give you a real scenario. Someone says something to you designed to provoke. Maybe it's a subtle dig disguised as a joke. Maybe it's a comment about your choices, your life, your appearance, delivered with a smile. Maybe it's the classic, "I'm just saying this because I care about you." Old you would have responded immediately, defended, explained, justified, maybe even apologized for something that wasn't your fault. And in doing so, you would have handed them exactly what they came for. Your reaction, your energy, your confirmation that they still have access to you. But New you looks at them, takes a breath, and says absolutely nothing. Not because you have nothing to say. You have everything to say. But you understand something now that you didn't before. Some people don't deserve a seat at the table of your inner world. And silence is how you revoke the invitation. Now watch what happens next. Because this is the part that will surprise you. When you don't react, when you hold that silence with calm, with steadiness, with zero apology, the other person starts to unravel. Not dramatically, not immediately, but something shifts. They repeat themselves. They push harder. They try a different angle. Because your silence has done something devastating to their strategy, it gave them nothing to work with. And a provocateur without a reaction is like a fire without oxygen. It dies. Not because you fought it, because you simply refused to feed it. There's a woman I want to tell you about. Let's call her Diana. For years, Diana had a mother-in-law who had a talent for the perfectly timed comment. Always at family dinners. Always in front of other people. Always just subtle enough that calling it out directly would make Diana look oversensitive. Diana used to respond every time. Calmly, she thought. Rationally. But every response opened a new door. A new argument. A new way for the dynamic to continue. One Thanksgiving, something shifted. The comment came, same as always. But this time Diana picked up her glass of water, took a slow sip, looked across the table, and simply continued the conversation with someone else. No reaction, no explanation, no visible disturbance. The comment landed in a room with no echo. Diana told me later. She never stopped making the comments. But they stopped landing, because I stopped being the target. The silence didn't change the other person. It changed Diana's relationship to the other person's power. And that is everything. But I need to be honest with you about something. Because this is where most people misunderstand what conscious silence actually is. It is not a tactic. It is not a manipulation technique. It is not the silent treatment designed to punish someone into submission. That kind of silence is just control wearing a different mask. True silence, the kind we're talking about, comes from a completely different place. It comes from a moment of genuine self-respect where you recognize, this is not a conversation I need to be in. This reaction is not mine to have. My peace is worth more than being right. You can feel the difference in your body. Punishing silence feels tight, angry, calculated. Sovereign silence feels still, clear, almost spacious. One drains you, the other one restores you. Jung wrote about what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to hold two opposing forces in tension without collapsing into either one. In plain language, the ability to feel the pull to react and choose not to feel the anger and not become it, to feel the hurt and not perform it for an audience that will use it against you. This is not suppression. This is mastery, and it is built one silent moment at a time. Every time you pause before responding, every time you let a provocative message sit unanswered for an hour, a day, forever, every time you walk away from a conversation that was designed to destabilize you, you are training something inside you that most people never develop. An unshakable center. And here is what that unshakable center does to the world around you. People start to sense it, not because you announced it, not because you posted about your growth journey online, but because something about the way you carry yourself has fundamentally changed. You walk into a room, and there's a quality to your presence that wasn't there before. A stillness, a groundedness, a sense that you cannot be easily moved. And people, whether they realize it or not, respond to that. The ones who fed off your chaos, they quietly drift away, because you are no longer a reliable source of what they need. The ones who are genuinely drawn to depth, they move closer, because real recognizes real. Your silence becomes a filter, removing what was never meant to stay, making space for what actually belongs. So here is your practice. Starting today, not next week, not when things calm down, not when you feel ready. Today, the next time someone says something designed to pull you off center, give yourself 3 seconds before you respond. Just 3. In those 3 seconds, ask yourself one question. Am I about to respond from my strength or from my wound? If it's from your wound, stay silent. Not forever, not dramatically, just long enough for the wound to stop driving. And then, from that still, clear, sovereign place, decide if a response is even necessary at all. Most of the time, it isn't. And the moment you discover that, the moment you feel the relief of not having to respond to everything, explain everything, defend everything, you will understand something that cannot be taught in a classroom or a therapy session or a self-help book. You will understand it in your bones, that your silence was never your weakness. It was your power, waiting for you to finally claim it. In part 5, we go to the place that makes all of this real. Because understanding silence is one thing. But what happens to your life, your actual, daily, concrete life, when you start living it? What do you lose? What do you gain? And what is born in the space where the noise used to be? That's where we're going next. The rebirth nobody warns you about. You don't find yourself by searching harder. You find yourself by finally stopping and letting everything that isn't you fall away. Nobody tells you what it actually feels like. When you first start pulling back, when you first start choosing silence over reaction, boundaries over availability, yourself over the exhausting performance of being everything to everyone. They tell you it's empowering. They tell you it's liberating. They tell you it's growth. And eventually, it is all of those things. But first, it feels like loss. The first week you stop over-explaining yourself, your phone gets quieter. The first time you say no without a 3-paragraph justification, someone looks at you differently. The first time you don't show up for a dynamic that used to consume you, you notice. Nobody comes to check if you're okay. And that silence, that sudden, unexpected quiet where all the noise used to be, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like abandonment. And in that moment, every old voice inside you says the same thing. See? This is what happens when you put yourself first. You end up alone. I need you to hear me very clearly right now. That voice is not wisdom. That voice is withdrawal. It is your nervous system, conditioned over years, maybe decades, reacting to the absence of chaos the only way it knows how. By calling the chaos back. Here's what's actually happening in that uncomfortable silence. Think about someone who has been in a loud, crowded room for hours. When they finally step outside into the quiet doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels disorienting, almost wrong. Their ears are still ringing. Their nervous system is still braced for noise. But give it 10 minutes. Give it 20. And slowly, the body remembers what peace actually feels like. That is exactly what is happening to you. You have been in the noise for so long that quiet feels like something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. You are finally decompressing. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus was the person everyone called. The fixer. The one with the answers. The one who could be reached at any hour for any problem. He had built his entire identity around being needed. And for years, it worked, in the way that self-destruction sometimes works. It kept him busy enough that he never had to sit alone with himself. Then one year, almost by accident, he took a solo trip. No agenda, no one to fix, no one calling with emergencies. Just Marcus, and 10 days of silence. The first 3 days, he told me, were almost unbearable. He kept reaching for his phone, kept feeling the phantom buzz of notifications, kept manufacturing reasons to check in with people back home. I felt useless, he said, and I didn't realize until that moment how much of my self-worth was built on being useful. But somewhere around day 4, something shifted. He started noticing things he hadn't noticed in years. What food he actually enjoyed, not what was convenient. What thoughts emerged when no one else's problems were filling the space. What his own voice sounded like when it wasn't busy managing everyone else's emotions. By day 10, Marcus said something I have never forgotten. I spent 42 years being available to everyone. And in 10 days of silence, I met myself for the first time. This is what Jung called individuation. Not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden awakening on a mountaintop, but a slow, sometimes painful, deeply personal process of becoming, for the first time, genuinely, completely, unapologetically yourself. Not the self your parents needed you to be. Not the self your relationships required you to perform. Not the self that was built in response to other people's expectations and wounds and projections. Your actual self. The one that existed before the conditioning. The one that has been quietly waiting underneath every role you ever played. And here is what Jung understood that most modern psychology still misses. You cannot find that self by adding more. More therapy. More self-help books, more productivity systems, more hustle. You find it by subtracting, by removing every relationship that requires you to be less than you are, by removing every dynamic that only works when you are available, reactive, and small, by removing every habit of over-explanation, over-availability, and over-accommodation, until what remains is something you haven't seen in a very long time. Yourself. Now let's talk about what you actually lose. Because you will lose things. And I won't insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. You will lose relationships. Some of them will be people you genuinely loved. People who genuinely loved you, but who related to you primarily through the role you played. And when the role changes, the relationship doesn't survive. That is real grief. Honor it. You will lose a version of yourself that felt comfortable, even if it was slowly killing you. The familiar pain of being needed is still familiar. And familiar, no matter how destructive, always feels safer than unknown. You will lose the false security of being indispensable. When you were available to everyone, you always had a place, a function, a reason to be in the room. Stepping back from that feels, at first, like stepping off a ledge. But here is what nobody warns you about losing. You will lose your tolerance for smallness, for conversations that go nowhere, for relationships built on convenience rather than depth, for environments that require you to shrink. And at first, that intolerance will feel like arrogance. It is not arrogance. It is discernment. The difference between the two is everything. Arrogance says, I am better than this. Discernment says, this is no longer aligned with who I am becoming. One pushes people down. The other simply moves forward. And now, what you gain. Because this is the part that cannot be fully described. Only experienced. But let me try. You gain mornings. Not the mornings where you wake up already bracing for other people's needs, already composing responses in your head before you've had coffee. Real mornings. Quiet ones. Where the first thought that enters your mind belongs entirely to you. You gain the ability to sit in a room full of people and feel completely at peace within yourself. Not performing, not managing, not reading the room and adjusting. Just present, whole, enough. You gain relationships that feel fundamentally different from anything you've experienced before. Not relationships built on your availability or usefulness, but relationships built on genuine recognition, where someone sees you, not the role, not the function, not the emotional infrastructure, but you. And you gain something that is almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't felt it yet. A kind of internal silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of emptiness, but the deep, resonant silence of someone who no longer needs the world's noise to feel real. You become your own reference point. Jung said that the most dangerous journey a human being can take is the journey inward. Dangerous, not because it destroys you, but because it destroys every false version of you. And false versions, no matter how limiting, are still familiar. Letting them go requires a kind of courage that looks, from the outside, like nothing at all. It looks like not responding to a text. It looks like leaving a party early. It looks like saying, "I'm not available for that," without explaining why. It looks like choosing a quiet evening alone over a room full of people who drain you. From the outside, it looks like nothing. From the inside, it is everything. So here is where we land. Not at the end of something. At the beginning. You came into this series as someone who was tired. Tired of reacting. Tired of performing. Tired of giving your best hours, your best energy, your best self, to people and situations that returned almost nothing. And everything we've walked through together, the conditioning, the manipulation, the silence, the withdrawal, it was never about becoming cold. It was never about building walls. It was never about becoming someone who doesn't feel, doesn't care, doesn't connect. It was about becoming someone who chooses. Someone who chooses where their energy goes. Someone who chooses which relationships deserve their depth. Someone who chooses, consciously, deliberately, without guilt, when to speak, when to stay silent, when to show up, and when to finally, completely, unapologetically, show up for themselves. That is not the end of connection. That is the beginning of real connection. The kind built on truth instead of need, on depth instead of convenience, on genuine recognition instead of mutual usefulness. And it has always started, with the simplest, most radical act available to you. Choosing yourself. Not someday. Not when things get better. Not when you feel ready. Now, tell me in the comments, what is the one thing, the one relationship, one habit, one dynamic that you already know is draining you? The one thing you've been too afraid to walk away from. Write it down, even if just for yourself, because naming it is the first act of reclaiming it. And if this series found you at the right moment, it wasn't an accident. See you in the next one.